The Supreme Court has struck down a Louisiana law that would have shut down most abortion clinics within the state. On Monday, Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the court's 4 liberal justices, voting 5-4 against the restrictions. It's the first major abortion rights decision since 2 of President Trump's conservative appointees took the bench. Meanwhile, in Mississippi, lawmakers voted on Sunday to remove the state's flag, the last in the nation to display a Confederate emblem. The historic bill passed by a vote of 91-23 in the House and 37-14 in the Senate. It now heads to the desk of Governor Tate Reeves, who could sign the legislation into law sometime today. It's the latest Confederate symbol to be toppled in recent weeks following nationwide calls for racial justice. Mississippi's flag has featured the Confederate emblem for more than 100 years. And for more on both the flag vote in Mississippi and the SCOTUS decision today on abortion, I want to go ahead and bring in CBS News reporter Kate Smith. Kate, good to have you with us. First of all, walk us through the Supreme Court decision on abortion. What arguments were made for and against admitting privileges?
This morning's decision from the Supreme Court was tremendously important for abortion right activists on both sides of the issue. It is a measured win for abortion rights supporters, but it is a clear loss for those who have seen the ideological makeup of the Supreme Court as an opening to start rolling back abortion privileges that have been granted in previous Supreme Court cases. So today's case looked at a Louisiana abortion restriction, called it admitting privilege. Basically what that means is that doctors who provide abortion are required to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of their clinic, meaning that if something were to go wrong during the procedure, they could seamlessly admit a patient straight from the clinic into the hospital. Now, what people found about that law was that it is largely unnecessary. Abortion is by and large a very safe procedure. In fact, the plaintiff at the center of this case in the past 20 years has only had 4 hospitalizations.
What impact would the restrictions outlined in the Louisiana law have had on abortion access within the state, and what other ramifications could it have on other states nationwide, the decision, rather?
So that is really why this case was so tremendously important. Now, the justices ruled in 2016 that when states regulate abortion, not only are they not allowed to levy an undue burden on the person seeking the abortion, but also the restriction has to have benefits that outweigh the burden for the patient. So the idea being that states can't implement and pass restrictions on abortion that are medically unnecessary. So in the case of Louisiana, this law would have actually closed all 3 abortion clinics that exist in the state. Now, 2 of those clinics currently do not have doctors who have admitting privileges, and the only one that does, that doctor had said he would retire if the law were to be implemented. That's because he already faces so much harassment and violence from anti-abortion activists, and he believed that if he were, quote, as he called, the last man standing, that would reach a level that would simply become just too safe for him and his family to deal with. So to answer your question, if this law were to be implemented, abortion would have been virtually eliminated in the entire state of Louisiana. It also would have given states an opening to levy their own abortion restrictions that would have similar effects. Now, the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion support research institute, they found that there are 15 different states that they identified that either already had laws that are very similar that have been previously struck down, or were poised to pass similar laws. So the idea being that not only Louisiana, but 15 additional states could see abortion, not only perhaps eliminated, but at least severely restricted had this law gone into effect today.
All right, Kate, I want to turn now to Mississippi. You and I have been watching this vote unfold throughout the weekend, and you also spoke to a Black Lives Matter activist about what he thinks he sees when he looks at the state flag. Take a listen.
As a young Black man in Mississippi, what does that flag mean to you?
Well, it really reminds me of a time that was not very inclusive of my ancestors or people who look like me, right? Like I'm, a lot of my ancestors who were beaten, traumatized, enslaved, it was under that flag, forced to do things that they didn't want to do. It was a time in Mississippi that we aren't proud of. While we can't change our history, we can change the trajectory of our future.
And Kate, just earlier this month, the majority of people in Mississippi wanted to keep the state's Confederate flag as it is. Talk to us more about the place that this controversial symbol has had in Mississippi culture and how public opinion has changed so quickly in recent weeks.
So like you mentioned, Mississippi is the last state, or I should say was the last state in the Union to include the Confederate battle emblem within the design of its own state flag. Now, in Mississippi, the Confederate flag, it's a nod to the state's history, their participation in the Confederate War, and many of the lives that were lost in that war. However, that symbol has been co-opted. To put it simply, it is a symbol of the Jim Crow South, It is a symbol of racism and hatred that, many Black Americans face in their life. And it's also been co-opted by the Ku Klux Klan. So, while this symbol, is a nod to the state's history and lives lost, it's been co-opted and it means something different. And that's what Jarius was saying when I interviewed him about what this flag means to him when you're looking at it. And to be honest, people in the state, they didn't see it that way. They were comfortable with the state flag. They were comfortable with the nod to the history of the Confederate War. But in the wake of George Floyd's death and the incredible Black Lives Matter movement that you have seen taking hold in the entire country, there was a very swift change of heart, and that all culminated this weekend. So earlier this month, like you mentioned, a majority of Mississippians did not favor changing the state flag, but a push from those progressive activists, as well as many business leaders speaking out about the flag, including the head of the SEC, the head of the NCAA, bank leaders, religious organizations, all saying that this flag no longer represents Mississippi. There was a change of heart. And late last week, there was a poll that showed 55% of Mississippians were in favor of changing the law. And like you saw this weekend, a vote was able to go through and lawmakers did vote to remove the flag.
Kate, can I ask you a little bit about the language that you used? I usually hear it referred to as the Civil War, not the Confederate War. Is that how people talk about it down in Mississippi, the Confederate War, rather than the Civil War? Because when I'm thinking about the symbol being co-opted, I'm not thinking about it being co-opted by the KKK. I'm thinking about it being flown by people who wanted to preserve the enslavement of Black people as a way of life in the South.
That's right. I mean, one thing in my reporting down south that I have learned is that the Civil War has a lot of different names that are used depending who you are talking to and, what side they are on. In fact, if you look at history books, they even use different words to describe the very same war that, we describe in very different terms all over the country. And, to them, they fought on the losing side of this war. And regardless of, that they lost, they did lose ancestors, and their ancestors died in this war. And there's been a difficult way for them to acknowledge their past and history, while also just not being offensive. And the problem is that symbol of the Confederate was co-opted, and it was used by the Ku Klux Klan, and it was used in the Jim Crow South. And it's a symbol that makes many Black Americans, or just Americans in general, uncomfortable. And it's why a lot of business leaders, when I was reporting this story, spoke about how because that is Mississippi's state flag, because that symbol is so prominent on the state flag, they were uncomfortable doing business. They heard from colleagues that they were uncomfortable doing business in the state because of that. So, while it was argued that this flag was a nod to the state's, participation in the war, the idea was that it is just simply too offensive to so many people. And again, that symbol has been co-opted to mean something different.
All right, Kate Smith, thank you.